Okay, well, thank you so much, Jay, for inviting me to speak to everyone tonight. And thanks a lot for that little trip back in time. I really have a lot of fun. I feel lucky to be able to do what I do for a career. And I really, part of one of my favorite parts of being a nature photographer and somebody who does photo workshops is being able to meet all you great people and facilitate really cool photo learning and travel experiences for you. And so, when you asked me to do this, basically to talk about myself and what I do rather than a certain photo topic or an instructional type of presentation, I was a little uncomfortable, but we'll just talk about me for the next hour or so. But I hope I'm going to try to sprinkle in a few photo tips here. And if at any time at the end of the program, if you want to ask any questions at all, like Jay said, I'm super happy to answer. And also, if you want to know how was this picture taken or some picture caught your eye or something like that, I'm happy to go into more. But I hope even as I talk about kind of how I got to do what I do, I hope it's a little bit educational and a little bit inspirational for you because I really think nature photography can enhance our lives. So I'm going to go right into it and I'm going to start sharing my screen. And here we go. So this is a tiny little poison frog from Panama, by the way. That's what's in this picture. And this picture was taken with only flash, by the way, even though I shot it at f2.8. So you can do some cool things with macro, with flash, and even with shallow depth of field. A lot of people think macro right away, you have to do f16. That can be great sometimes, but it doesn't always have to go like that. So this is me, uh, and my site, Deep Green Photography, is my own photo website. And then over on the right, you can see my social media channels and all that. And then in the middle, Foto Verde Tours. Photo in Spanish is spelled with an F, not a PH. Foto Verde Tours is the tour company of which I'm co-owner with my good friend, who I'll introduce you to later on the screen. And we run photo tours throughout Latin America, throughout our home region in Latin America. So yeah, so I take pictures throughout Latin America, sometimes with my phone, sometimes with a camera trap, sometimes with a remote system. You can see I was super into this shot, which was a wide angle hummingbird picture at the lodge that Jay showed some pictures of called Bosque de Paz, right near my house where I am tonight, actually. I love hummingbirds, and we usually get to photograph those on a trip, depending on which country we're in. But I like all sorts of photography. So I'm into photographing birds like this keel-billed toucan, this one like this magnificent frigate bird. Hummingbirds I love. This is the super amazing sword-billed hummingbird from Ecuador, who is the only bird whose bill is longer than its body, by the way. And this flower is a type of passion fruit or passion flower plant with which this sword-billed hummingbird co-evolved because only that hummingbird can pollinate this plant because of the long bill. I love reptiles too. This is a giant tortoise from the Galapagos. I love snakes. This is an emerald tree boa from Panama. An emerald tree boa, by the way, it's a juvenile, and the juveniles are orange. Once they get to be adults, they're emerald green, hence the name. This is the famous red-eyed tree frog from Costa Rica. I love photographing mammals too, like this puma from Chile, or ants, insects like this bullet ant, which was almost 2 inches long, and they're super dangerous. This was from the Amazon of Peru. I love photographing plants too. This is from Colombia. It's a really unique plant. I love photographing animals in their environment. These are vicuñas in the Atacama Desert of Chile. Vicuñas are one of the wild relatives of llamas and alpacas. And I love landscape photography as well, whether it's in Chile and Patagonia, or even in more closed-in areas like this rushing river in a canyon here in Costa Rica. But I also love photographing cities too. This is Valparaiso in Chile. This is the bustling skyline of Panama City, Panama. At the Blue Hour. Really, really fun. And I did a lot of scouting, believe it or not, to get to this location. And we're actually going to offer it on our Panama tour next year. But I love photographing people too when I'm out. I'm into nature, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I got there. But people are part of biodiversity too, and so photographing people like this coffee farmer, our friend Andres from Colombia, or this festival up in the highlands of Peru. those can really add a lot to your portfolio. And also by photographing lots of different things, you can open yourself up to learning new photo techniques and expand your toolkit as a photographer, of course. So this is, when I wax philosophical a little bit, I think nature photography can enhance our lives in five ways. Maybe there's more too, but these are the ways it's enhanced mine. You're always learning new skills. You're learning about ecology and culture of the places you're going to photograph. That might be your own backyard that you're learning more about, or a different country entirely. You can build camaraderie by meeting people with similar interests. It allows you to get your creative juices out there, and you can support conservation as well. And so throughout the rest of the presentation, I'm going to touch on these themes. I'm not going to make it super organized around these themes, but I think you'll see them appear as I go through. So Jay talked about, my life story, and I told him when we were talking about the presentation before that, well, Jay, it all started on a dark and stormy Mother's Day night many years ago in Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I was born. Thanks, Mom and Dad. This is an AI image, and I have to say I hate what AI is doing to photography in terms of just being able to generate images, not AI capabilities that allow us to do masking and things like that. But this is pretty amazing. I just literally typed in to, I think, Microsoft Copilot and put in dark and stormy sky, Fort Dix, New Jersey. And this is what came up. And it's pretty amazing. So I was born in New Jersey, but I left when I was about one. So I wasn't there long enough to pick up the accent. And we moved to St. Louis, which is where I grew up. So I'm a Midwesterner, just like all of you or most of you on this call tonight. Um, I went to undergraduate school in Quincy University in Quincy, Illinois, up on the Mississippi River, just across from Hannibal, Missouri. And I majored there. I had a double major in ecology and political science. And so I was always interested, even from a younger age, about in the environment and kind of environmental politics and conservation and things like that. So after I graduated from college, I joined the Peace Corps, and I was lucky to be sent to Costa Rica, which is now my home country and has been for about the past over 20 years now. When I was in the Peace Corps, I made some good friends. Why we had a picture of tattoo, I have no idea, but these are some of my friends. That's me there at my first attempt growing a beard. I was pretty successful. That wasn't half bad. But I had a really fulfilling experience in the Peace Corps, and I worked in a project with the local farmers cooperative, actually in the town where I am right now and where I live, on a program that was emphasizing reforestation with native tree species to be mixed in with all the agriculture that goes on in the area. There's a lot of dairy and also cool weather crops where I live. So people are growing potatoes and carrots and cabbage and broccoli and things like that, and onions and garlic. And it was a really fulfilling experience because it was actually meaningful to the town. And I still see people today who say, "Wow, that project was so great." And we still have trees growing, native trees growing on our farm that were part of the project. It was fun because I met, some really good friends. I fell in love with Costa Rica, but more importantly, I fell in love with one special woman, my wife, Ana, who is a native Costa Rican. And her hometown is where we met, Zarcero, where I live right now. And so it changed my life in more than one way, my Peace Corps experience. So after I finished the Peace Corps, Anna and I got married, and we went back to St. Louis because I wanted to continue studying. So I went to UMSL, or University of Missouri St. Louis, where I did a program that was focused on tropical ecology and political science. And it was basically about sustainable development and the politics of the environment in Latin America. That program was in cooperation with the Missouri Botanical Garden, which is a beautiful place that maybe some of you have visited, but it's also at the forefront. It's one of the top three in tropical plant research in the world, and number one in Latin America. Kew Botanical Gardens in London and New York Botanical Gardens are the other two who are really heavily into tropical plant research. So I did this program, and I also, while I was going to school, worked full time at the Missouri Botanical Garden, and I worked right in that famous dome, the Climatron, which is a rainforest replica. And so I got to understand tropical plants even better, and it was a really great experience. And I went on to do a dissertation on the politics of ecotourism in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. And so when we moved back to Costa Rica, just for a few years, I had kind of planned on probably I'd finish and then maybe be a college professor back in the US. My wife loved living in the US, just like we love living in Costa Rica. So we were happy wherever we ended up. But when I was out doing my field research on that, I started taking some photos. It was my first time photographing, and I actually sold a few photos, like this one of a purple-throated mountain gem female hummingbird pollinating a native verbena flower. And I actually sold this photo. It was my first published photo to one of the Lonely Planet guides to Central America, I think it was. And so I bought some more gear and I sold a few more photos and I bought some more gear and I sold more photos and I bought more gear. And that's still going on even today. But my thoughts drifted to a career change. And eventually I did that. And now I make my living as a nature photographer. How does one do that as a nature photographer, you might ask? Part of it is books, whether they're physical books or ebooks. So I have things like this physical coffee table book I did a few years ago of national parks of Costa Rica, which I did in combination with the local what do you call it, printer or the local press thing. Um, that's the main one involved in kind of natural history books and conservation. And this was in concert with Cornell University Press as well. And I've been going to meetings now and we're starting to work on the second edition of the book because the first one has sold well, thankfully. And so I'm going to have to be making, or I'm going to have the opportunity, the luck to get to go out and travel again in Costa Rica and take a bunch of new, hopefully special photos for the second edition of the book where it'll feature maybe 40% new photos or something like that. So that's one way. Ebooks are another way, or in this case, a Lightroom video series, for instance. My probably biggest ebook and best known ebook is Flash for the Nature Photographer because it is, I will humbly say, the resource on that subject, partly because there's not that much information out there. So maybe it's sort of like being the tallest hill in Kansas, but it is a really good ebook, and I've made it available in Spanish recently because I got a lot of contacts from people in Latin America who said, I'd love to buy this book, but I don't speak English. And so my son Chris helped with the translation. I mean, I can do it. It's just time consuming. And my son Chris is obviously bilingual and bicultural because he grew up speaking both languages. Both of my sons did. I have twin sons, one who lives in Costa Rica and one who lives in the US up in Alaska. Another way you make money, not a lot of money as a nature photographer, is through stock imagery. So I have my pictures represented through a company called Minden Pictures, which is one of the main big international natural history picture libraries. And so you get some sales. Where do your pictures appear? You might wake up one morning to find it on the homepage of Bing or Microsoft or Explorer or whatever, or wherever it would be. It might decorate a Pilates studio in Johannesburg, South Africa, which was a weird request I had, but they wanted to print one of my pictures here from Costa Rica, giant in the space. I try to do as much as I can with magazine articles. Some could be like natural history type publications. This is from BBC Wildlife Magazine. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this project later, about tapirs later on. And sometimes it's in magazines as well, for print magazines, but more educational type content. Like I've done some stuff with different magazines around the world. So I'm lucky to be able to photograph in one of the most amazing areas of the world in terms of nature. Latin America, it's a pretty big landmass, but it's actually only 13% of the Earth's land, but it holds over 40% of the Earth's biodiversity of all its species. And that's pretty amazing. And so we have some really cool examples of evolution, especially in the tropical parts of Latin America. This, for instance, is a white-tipped sicklebill hummingbird whose beak fits perfectly with only a few species of heliconias, and it's the only one that can get its beak in there to sip nectar and in the process pollinate those plants. And so they've evolved together over time, and they couldn't do without one another. That's called mutualistic symbiosis, by the way. We have these amazing tiny colored, brightly colored poison frogs that actually have toxins in their skin glands, and they're brightly colored to protect themselves from predators like birds or snakes. You have just crazy adaptations in the insect world, like this spiny devil katydid from Ecuador. And part of that diversity is because there's a big diversity of habitats in Latin America. We have some of the world's wettest rainforests, like this in Peru or this one in Costa Rica. We have lowland flooded forests and mangroves. some with super black water, which is a result of the tannins in all the leaves and the plants and trees dropping their leaves into the water. And the tannin and defensive chemical compound concentration is so high that the water is actually black. This isn't a Photoshop thing or anything like that. This is what this water really looks like. We have tropical beaches. We have beaches throughout, some that are not tropical, but some beautiful, beautiful tropical beaches, as you can imagine. And we have ecosystems that are cover a big, extensive area, especially throughout the Andes, but through Central America as well, called highland paramos. And these are kind of subalpine, grassy, shrubby areas that are just below where the tree line stops. A lot of times there are active volcanoes, like the Poas volcano, which is actually just about in a straight line, mm, 10 miles from my house. Still active. Sometimes you can smell the sulfur, and we even had some ash coming down a few months ago where people were covering up their cars and closing their windows and everything. There are amazing plants in these highland paramos, some of which are ancient. This is a highland bog in Costa the most critically endangered ecosystem throughout Latin America. Only about 5% of those remain. They're really interesting because the trees lose their leaves in the dry season. They have a really pronounced dry season, unlike most of the forests in tropical Latin America, where it's rainforest. The dry forests tend to be kind of studded with cacti, and they've been cut down a lot, mostly for beef production. And for other things, and it's really hard for them to regenerate. So this is an aerial shot I took for my Costa Rica book a few years ago, and if you look at this, I don't think you'd ever guess this was in Costa Rica. So it's a bizarre looking landscape. It almost looks like it's on Mars or something. We have my favorite ecosystem, misty cloud forests, which are just beautiful and usually full of really cool waterfalls. And we have the world's driest desert as well, the Atacama Desert of Chile and Bolivia and Argentina, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. And even fjords and glaciers down in the south of the South American continent, right at the end in Patagonia. And so you have scenes that look more like Scandinavia or something like that. So with this diversity of photo subjects, of course, you have to use a diversity of photo techniques, and that means a lot of gear as well. But I do try to keep it as simple as possible. And so Jay asked me to share with you what I use on a daily basis for gear. So I have lots of things. I have macro stuff for frogs and bugs. I have equipment to do multiple flash with hummingbirds and bats, which is where you kind of do a little studio outdoors with various flashes that allow you to create the light and stop the action. Of course, I use some telephoto equipment for wildlife and birds. I'll do some aerials. Sometimes, depending on the project, there might be a budget that I'll do it from a helicopter or a gyrocopter or a small plane or with a drone, which can be really useful. Wide angle lenses, of course, for scenics and wildlife, and even some camera trapping. And so this is what I use in terms of cameras. I have the Canon R5. I'll probably be getting the new Canon R5 II when I come to the US in a couple of months, hopefully. I have a Canon 80D that I use for camera trapping. That's an old body, but very good and reliable. I have a little Osmo Action by DJI. That's like a GoPro, which is kind of fun for some YouTube stuff and things like that behind the scenes. I have a drone that I don't use nearly enough, but I should use it more because it can add a lot to a portfolio from a certain shoot. And I have actually a good phone, a Samsung phone now, that takes great photos and videos, like a lot of smartphones do these days. And those are really actually useful for kind of social media and PR and YouTube and things like that. And then I have a little Canon EOS M50 that I keep here at home for filming videos for YouTube and things like that. Nice little camera. The lenses I use, um, I don't have too many, but I do have a couple more. A couple of these are a Canon 22 millimeter and a Sigma 16 millimeter, and those go with that little Canon EOS M50 that I use for the video. But for my main photo stuff, I'm using the Canon 100 millimeter RF for macro. I've tried to move most of my lenses over, or all of them, over to mirrorless mount. I have the Canon 14 to 35 f4 for wide angle work, which is a great lens. Um, Over on the right, you see a photo of the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens. This is what I used to use, but now I use the Canon 100 to 500 millimeter lens. And I'll show you that in a second. And then up at the top left, as you look at it, that's the Laowa 15 millimeter macro lens. So it goes to one macro, but with a 15 millimeter field of view. So you can do some really cool stuff with that. It's a little hard to use because it's only manual focus, but with focus peaking and manual in mirrorless cameras, it really helps a lot. And so I have a Canon mount adapter to be able to use that with my mirrorless cameras. So my main telephoto lens is the Canon 100 to 500 millimeter zoom. You might be surprised that a pro nature photographer doesn't have a giant 600 millimeter f4 or some lens like that. But I've found that this does just fine for what I need to do for telephoto work. I have the Canon 50 millimeter 1.8 lens for people and things like that. Great bargain and a little lens. And I'm going to buy, actually probably tomorrow, the Canon 24 to 240 because I found myself wanting kind of a more all-around lens at some point. But th those are the lenses I use. I use a lot of flash. Godox is my brand of choice. I do have a little deal with them for certain things, but I also think it's far and away the best value you can get. And they have different flash models that makes it easy to grow a little flash system for not much money. And of course, you can see up there, I have flash transmitters, so I'll do a lot of off-camera flash. And all these Godox flash units that you see there have receiver capability built in, radio receiver capability. So I don't have to have extra receivers. I just put the transmitter in my camera's hot shoe, put the flashes where I want, set them up in receiver mode, and I'm good to fire off as many flashes as I need to wirelessly. Filters, I'm still a big fan of filters for a lot of work. I don't use graduated neutral density filters anymore just because I've found that it's not necessary with the dynamic range of our cameras these days. There's some people who still use them, and I respect that for sure. But I found it just simpler to not use those. So the filters I use are all by a company called Freewell. The ones on the left are for my drone, and the ones at the bottom right, those are the main ones that I use. They're the Freewell magnetic filters, which is really a really cool system because you screw on a magnetic base to all of your lenses. And if you have lenses that have the same size filter thread, that can help, but they also have magnetic step-up rings too. And then all the filters you want to use, like a polarizing filter, ND filters, a combo ND polarizing filter, you just pop it right on there. It snaps in magnetically, and you're good to go. And you can even stack filters on top of each other magnetically too. And you don't have to worry about getting them cross-threaded. I remember one time we had to break somebody's filter on a tour to get it off their lens because it was stuck so bad. So I really recommend that if you're getting into filters, the Freewell magnetic system are great. For bags, I have an old a Canon backpack that I'll use for that I think this costs like $35 that I'll use when I'm not taking all my gear out in the field. I just need a limited set of what I'm going to take. Works great. I have an old Kiboko Gura gear bag that I use when I'm really going to load up my full pack for a day out in the forest or wherever I'm going. And then when I travel, to other countries for our workshops or for other photo projects, I put all my gear in a Pelican Air rolling case, and that fits in the overhead bin in the airport. And then over on the right is a think tank shapeshifter bag, which I can put my laptop and all sorts of accessories in, and that works to go under the seat as your second carry-on item. And my tripod, I've used big tripods in the past. I've used a number of tripods, but about a year ago, I decided on this tripod by a company called Hype, I believe is how you pronounce it. It's super small and lightweight. It's a travel tripod, but it holds. I have no problem with my 100 to 500 millimeter lens on it, even with a teleconverter. I would even feel comfortable putting 500 millimeter prime on there with no problem. But it's super light and compact. It has its own integrated ball head, and the center column is actually that mini tripod that you see in the middle. And so if you pull it out enough, you pull it out, the three legs just go up, and that's your center column. If you pull it out all the way, then you have a little mini tripod that you can take anywhere. It's just a really cool design, super lightweight, super portable, and easy to travel with. When you travel, you're always trying to look for ways to save weight and space. So Jay talked a little bit about what I do in terms of my photo tours, and this is our company logo, Foto Verde Tours. There's the website right there. We are the first and still only company registered in Costa Rica dedicated to photographic tourism. And this all started when I met this guy, my good friend and future business partner, Paulo Valerio. Paulo's a native Costa Rican, and he's a biologist and a photographer as well. And Paulo was one of the best naturalist guides in Costa Rica. And then eventually he started his own tour company to serve as the local operator for an American travel company wholesaler that did a lot of trips to Costa Rica. So Paulo already knew how to run a travel company when we met, and he was running one. And we met and we just got along well. We had shared interests. And Paulo told me, Greg, we should start our own company that does photo tours because at this point, there were more photographers wanting to come. You know, digital was becoming a thing, was a thing then. Most cameras were digital. And Paulo said, but all they do is they stick them on birding tours. And that's not the same thing, obviously. A birder and a photographer are different animals, right? So, Paulo and I went out, we photographed together, we got to know each other, we became good friends, and we started the company. And I mentioned at the beginning of the program, and I really mean this sincerely, that it's one of our biggest joys is to be able to provide cool experiences for everybody, like this group from Costa Rica last year, or this group in Ecuador enjoying one of our favorite pizza places. Those are our local guides on the right and drivers, Frank, Amanda, and Galo. This is a group we had just recently here in Costa Rica, another one with a drone group photo. And the photo tours, I love it. But I'm not only working on photo tours when I'm out leading a photo tour, it leaves me exhausted actually at the end of most days because there's so much planning and logistics. And that even with the fact that Paulo runs the office part mostly and reservations and the payments and banking and things like that, and our accountant and our taxes. We have an accountant, but Paulo's the one who feeds him the information, whereas I'm in charge of planning and logistical coordination and scouting and promo and things like that. So, our aim on our tours, and I hope I don't mean this to sound like an infomercial, but it's to take you to really cool places, whether it's the rainforest like this place here in the Tortuguero National Park of Costa Rica, Chile's Atacama Desert, um, Patagonian Chile, which is where we go to photograph pumas, beautiful tropical beaches in Costa Rica, waterfalls, the Ecuadorian Amazon, wherever. We're trying to get you to amazing places. And like Jay mentioned, and I appreciate Jay mentioning this because it's really true when we're out on trips, I'm always there first for you. Not to take my own pictures. I might take a few pictures during the trip, but I'm always checking to make sure everybody's doing okay on their pictures. We really like to have people learn a little bit about the culture of where we're going to. I think that's important. And when we have specialized sessions like multiple flashes that I mentioned for hummingbirds or bats, we provide all the equipment. There's Paula with all that gear that you see there. That's all our equipment for people to use for those setups there. And we take care of everything on a trip, whether it's here in Costa Rica or the other countries where we operate. We take care of everything from the moment you step off the plane in country until the moment we drop you off at the airport. So that includes logistics, it includes transportation and meals and lodging and all those sorts of things. We have four goals for everybody on our trips. We hope and we deliver. But we want you to improve your photography skills and learn some new skills that will serve you well during the trip. And then wherever you travel or back home after the trip, we hope you take great photos that you really like and that probably wouldn't have been possible without our help. And we want you to make new photo friends. And importantly, we want you to learn about the places and subjects you photograph because I see a lot of tours go places and I don't think they really learn much about where they are and what they're photographing. And so we think that's really important. One thing we always do on our trips is when we're going to go to someplace new, we do scouting beforehand. It's not necessarily that common in the photo tour industry, but we always do scouting beforehand. This is Paulo and I up at 4,000 meters in the Atacama Desert in Chile, and those are coca leaves, by the way, which really do help to reduce the chances of altitude sickness. But before we did any trips to Chile, we flew down twice, once to the Atacama Desert and once to Patagonia to check things out for ourselves, scout the locations we wanted to take people to, do some of our own photography on our own time, and then be able to put together good workshops. We're a registered tour company, and that's important. I'm going to mention this in a few minutes, but we pay our taxes to the Ministerio de Hacienda, which is like the IRS. We have our insurance policy with the National Insurance Institute. We have our operating permit where our office is in the capital city. We belong to the Chamber of Tourism, and we're also a licensed member of the Ministry of Tourism, which is a government ministry here too. So we're doing things by the book, is the point. We do a few trips. This is just some of the trips we do. but we do three in our home country of Costa Rica. One called Art of Biodiversity, which we do every April, and it's a great chance to catch the amazing resplendent quetzal in flight when it's bringing back food to its chicks in the nest. And so that's kind of the highlight of that trip. We do another one in June called Ultimate Rainforest Photography that does a lot of things, including toucans and hummingbirds, but has a big focus on macro stuff, including wide angle macro, like this shot of a helmeted basilisk lizard, which is a really cool technique. And we do one every December that's called The Art of Flight, which of course focuses quite a bit on birds, but also hummingbirds and bats and even butterflies. In Ecuador, one of our favorite trips is one that's called Amazon to Andes. This is the Ecuadorian poison frog, about 3 inches long, maybe max, maybe 2.5. Beautiful, beautiful little guy. And so on this one, we're photographing on all sorts of wildlife in the Amazon, monkeys, poison frogs, and also some of the amazing birds and hummingbirds up in the cloud forests of Ecuador as well. We do another one in Ecuador called Nature and Culture, where we mix some of those things I mentioned before, but also do some cultural and travel photography. It's becoming one of my favorite trips. Actually, it's just really interesting and a little different from what we normally do. We're doing our first trip to the Galapagos next year. I went there to do scouting last October, and I really, really liked it. Maybe some of you have already been there, so you know how amazing it is. It was my first time, and I was blown away. We do Colombia, and I'm going to be leaving for Colombia in 2 weeks, where we tried to do hummingbirds and a cool bird called cock of the rock, along with some cityscapes and landscapes and different things. Colombia is really, really amazing and super safe, by the way. Chile, the highlight of Chile is pumas. Some of you, Paula actually has done, Paula and Scott have done this trip with me. Really amazing to see wild pumas up close. Next year, we're going to be doing our first trip to Panama, which is amazing for a number of things, but one of the highlights is sloths. It's the best place we've ever gone to photograph sloths. And we're going to do a new trip in Peru next year that's going to also mix quite a bit of nature, including poison frogs and hummingbirds and the Andean condor, along with some really cool kind of cultural and travel photography. So those are the sorts of things we do on our workshops. I hope you'll check us out right there. There's our website. And I did want to, because this is something I think about a lot. And you see a lot of shady things in the tour business. You know, it's like any business. People tend to think that maybe nature photography is everybody's great people or honest people. It's not true. It's like any other business. There's scams out there. I could tell you some stories. Um, but I don't want to see people, and I'm not saying that if you don't go with us, you're doing it wrong. But these are some red flags, in my experience, that you should look out for if you decide to take a photo workshop, especially a photo workshop to another country because you're paying a lot of money for those workshops. And so a few red flags are if the person running the tour is just a private person, they're not incorporated as a company or they don't have their own company, because then they're not going to have insurance that's going to cover things if anything should happen, even though you have to buy your own travel insurance. But so that's important. You also don't have any legal recourse necessarily, especially in other countries, in terms of getting something back if the trip gets canceled and they don't want to refund your money, for instance. Um, if the tour leader takes lots of their own images on tours, that should be a red flag that might not be the tour for you. A little pet peeve of mine, and I see this all over Instagram and Facebook all the time. Tour leaders posting a picture of them with their laptop open with some cool picture on the screen and in some cool lodge overlooking the forest and says, "My office for the day, editing my pictures from yesterday's shoot." And it's like, well, how is your office editing your own pictures that you took on the workshop you're leading? So if you see that sort of thing, that should raise some questions. If the tour doesn't use a registered local company for logistics, I think that's a red flag too, because they're probably trying to cut corners by booking things themselves directly. And what would happen if there's an earthquake or a hurricane or a lodge catches fire? And these are all things that happen, by the way. And you have to scramble to book a new hotel or get things done. There's no substitute for doing that with a local company registered in that country. So when we go to other countries outside of Costa Rica, we always work with local registered operators who are usually photographers like us who have their own photo tour companies in each country. And we've had to do some things sometimes when things happen and they take care of it. Even though we could do it because we speak the language, there's nothing like having the local experts on your team to help. Um, If the tour leader has never been to the country, they haven't done scouting, which, believe it or not, happens more often than you think, that should be a red flag. If you see, for instance, that on their website the pictures aren't theirs, maybe that they're choosing to promote the tour with, that could be a red flag. I really think if the tour leader doesn't really know anything about the natural history of the country, or they don't know anything about the culture, or they don't speak the language of the country, it probably means they don't have much experience, if any, in that country, and they're just kind of going along, taking some photos, but they're probably not going to be able to offer you a really in-depth look at the techniques, photo techniques used in that country to do the kind of photography necessary. And of course, they're not going to be able to help you much with the context of what you're photographing. If the price seems too good to be true, like in all walks of life, that might be a sign. And if the tour doesn't include all local logistics, I really think a good tour should include everything, because part of a successful photo tour is trying to design the trip in such a way that it has a good flow in terms of being a pleasant travel experience for people as well. And so if they're leaving part of the logistics up to you, that could just lend itself to all sorts of problems and scheduling problems. So Jay asked me to talk to you a little bit about a how I took a couple of pictures that I really like. And so here's one that I took of coatimundis in the rainforest. Coatimundis are a type of neotropical raccoon. Um, and they're a lot like raccoons. They're mischievous, but they're more active during the daytime than the nighttime, actually. And so I was at one of my favorite lodges here in Costa Rica a few years ago, up near the border with Nicaragua. As you can see on the map there, our northern neighbor is Nicaragua. Our southern neighbor is Panama here in Costa Rica. And at this lodge, my friend Diego, who's one of the local guides, I went up here by myself to do some special pictures for my book. He said, the coatis always move and pass by here on their way to the lodge's compost pile, because the compost pile is going to be full of food scraps and bugs and frogs and all sorts of things that they can eat. They'll eat whatever they can get their hands on. And I wanted to do another picture of king vultures. And so I decided to set up a camera trap and just leave it out the whole day in the hopes that the coatis would come by at some point. So you can see down on the right the gear that I used. I used a wide angle lens and a polarizing filter. I had a tripod, and there's a thing down there called the Cognisys Range IR, which is a motion beam. So you set that up to point out to hopefully where something is going to move across the frame, and it fires the camera. I also had a bunch of flashes, because what you want to do in this case, you need to make sure that you're basically um, underexposing the scene when it's cloudy, so that in the case that it would get really sunny, and in the tropical rainforest during the rainy season, you can have bright sun and all of a sudden there's a torrential downpour, then there's bright sun again. So you need to make sure that your exposure is set. Since you're leaving it out there, you can't go back and change any settings. So you set everything up in manual mode, and you make sure that your exposure is fine, even if the sun came out, so that even if the sun came out super bright, you wouldn't have blown out highlights. And that means if it's cloudy, it's going to be pretty underexposed. So the flashes are doing most of the work. So it's really all about careful positioning of the flashes. By the way, you pre-focus the lens as well. In this case, you just guess where they're going to come through, pre-focus on that point, and leave it. You don't want to have autofocus trying to hunt when you're not there and you don't know what's happening. So this is the kind of the little lighting scheme I had. I had three flashes. And so in the hot shoe of my camera, I had a flash transmitter. And then in this case, I wasn't using Godox flashes. It was a few years ago. I was using some other flashes. So on each flash, I had a radio receiver as well. And then I had the motion beam, the Cognisys Range IR, hooked into the camera's cable release port, so that when something broke the beam, something moved in front of the camera, um, the shutter would go off and the flash transmitter would send out the signal to all the receivers to fire the flashes. And so I had one flash, you can see to the left, and I had two flashes kind of toward the back, but I had those all raised up high. I don't have them at eye level, because when the flash is doing most or all of the work on the subject, you really want to have that flash come from up above so that you can create some shadows that look natural, just like the light comes from above when it's cloudy out, when it's sunny out, whatever. You want to have those shadows to avoid a flashed looking picture. And so that's what I was going for. And so this is kind of, you can see as the scene, these are where and so I have the flashes set up in manual power. just because I had my camera settings in manual mode. I chose my aperture, I chose my shutter speed, and I chose my ISO. None of those things was going to change. So the flash power needs to be constant as well to ensure good exposure, which you arrive at after a few test shots. So I had all the flashes at 1/8 power, but they were different distances from the scene, from the center stage where hopefully the coatis were going to move through. So by varying the distance, even though the flash power was the same, that's how you can create shadows because effectively, let's say the flash at top right was farther away, even though it's firing at the same power, it's farther away than the one on the left. And so this is my shot I got, which, like I said, all the light was from flashes. And I think it looks very, very natural. And I think it's a really cool kind of family portrait of a gregarious animal like the coatimundi. What's up with that light ray at the top? That's not a post-processing thing. I put Ziploc bags over all the flashes because I knew at some point it would rain. And you can tell since the leaves are all wet that it did. And when it rained at some point before the coatis that came through. Then the sun came out again, and that caused condensation in the Ziploc bags. And then when the coatis came through, it created this kind of light ray effect, which was just a stroke of luck. I'm going to show you another one, and this one has to do with flash as well. This one I actually took in the US. I took it in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. This was on one of Ted Turner's ranches in New Mexico. This was on his smaller ranch, which I think is like 300,000 acres or something like that. The place is enormous. And I was invited there. I used to do some workshops at the Bosque del Apache in New Mexico, which was a really cool place. And my friends with whom I did those workshops support a local raptor rehabilitation group. And we had worked with them before, and they wanted to do a promotional thing about the importance of raptors, and they wanted to show their relationship with bats in these caves, which are actually ancient lava tubes in New Mexico. And so they invited me up to photograph the bats, and a couple of my friends were going to try to catch photos of, I can't remember which hawks it were, but that will congregate as the bats fly out at night. These are Mexican free-tailed bats, so they're flying out by the millions. And so they were going to try to get these hawks preying on the bats as well. And so I went out there. I had three nights potentially to try to get this shot. I ended up deciding on two flashes, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But when we first got out to the site, uh, we found that it was just crawling with rattlesnakes. We went out with the ranch biologist, and I mean, it was so crawling with rattlesnakes that you literally had to look down, scan for about 10 feet, walk, stop, and scan again. It was, I'm not exaggerating. That's how many rattlesnakes there were, and they camouflage themselves really well. A couple of people that we were with almost got bit on the first day. Um, so that was a little freaky. And so you can see at the bottom left, that's the lava tube. They're these ancient lava tubes that the bats roost in during the day and fly out at night and fly back into in the early morning, just before dawn. And so the first idea was to shoot it from up above. And at the top right, that's what I did the first evening to kind of check things out. And that's kind of cool, but it just didn't give me, and in the bottom right, you can see that's what it looked like from above. But it just wasn't giving me I don't know, the bat's big enough in the frame, I guess, or the feeling of being as close to the bats as I wanted. I wanted a wide angle shot. And so I asked the biologist, can I go down to the entrance of the lava tube? And he said, yeah, that's no problem, but there are more rattlesnakes down there. And I said, oh, that's great. How could there be more? And not only that, they're a different color morph because down there the rocks are more reddish. So they've evolved to be more reddish down by the cave entrance. But anyway, I decided, well, I've got to do it. And so I went down the next night, the second night, and I got everything set up. And I wanted to set up before dusk so that I'd make sure everything was going. And then I had about 45 minutes while I was just sitting down there by myself and looking at every rock, thinking, is that a rattlesnake? Is that a rattlesnake? And I was starting to get a little freaked out. But then the bats started pouring out. And there's me over on the left, and you can see how I have my flashes aimed up and I have a wide angle lens, and they're literally just whizzing past me. It was one of the coolest photo experiences I've ever had. I did put on like a bandana and stuff like that. Probably knowing what we know now, I might have bought a better mask. But it was a super, super cool experience. Once the bats started coming out, I just got in the zone and I forgot all about the rattlesnakes. And so what I was trying to do is expose for the sky, the kind of blue hour sky, as you can see in the pictures on the right. I have the top of the cave as a silhouette and the blue hour sky. Now the bats would also be silhouettes if there were no flash on them. So that's how I set up my two flashes. And I was just working there with a cable release and I would just shoot and shoot and shoot when I thought there were bats passing close overhead. And I had both of them at 1/16th power in this case, because the intensity of a flash isn't determined by a brighter or less bright pop of light. It's actually determined by the duration. So by setting the flashes at the same power, I knew that the flash duration would be the same, and that's how I could freeze the action without having like weird effects going on. But to see how much ghosting I would get, where you get the motion trails during a longer exposure where the subject is moving, and then they get frozen with the brief pop of flash, that's going to depend on the shutter speed. So if you look back at these, especially the first two on the top right, the shutter speed was faster, probably about 1/60th of a second. So the bats are sharp and you don't see much of a motion trail. At the bottom right, that picture there, you can start to see a little more motion blur, and that was starting to get to more like I think 1/30th of a second. But for the one I really wanted, and as it got darker, I kept adjusting my shutter speed to keep the exposure for the sky the same, this really dark kind of twilight blue. And this is the photo I got that I like best. And by here, I was down to like 1/5 of a second or something like that. So you really got a lot of motion trails, but the one that it looks kind of like, I don't know, it reminded me of Batman for some reason. But then you have the flash illuminating and producing a sharp subject in this picture. And I just really like this one because it almost looks, since I used the flash in the first curtain, not the second curtain, which I did on purpose, it almost looks like it's descending down into the bat cave. That was kind of my thought on taking this picture. But these pictures were really well received. It was a super fun challenge. I got out of there as soon as I finished. The biologist came back down with me, helped me gather up gear and walk out without getting bitten by rattlesnakes. And then I thought, you know what? There are a couple of things I might do differently on the third night. But the third night, the monsoon season started. This was in August, and we couldn't get anywhere near the cave because all the roads were flooded. So that was my big chance, and I was pretty happy with how it turned out. And it was a really cool experience. And it was an experience that did help out a group trying to do something important with local conservation. And so Jay wanted me to talk a little bit about this as well. And so conservation photography is now a whole genre of things, but it's basically putting your nature photography images to work to support conservation. That can be in your backyard, it can be in a different country, it can be a global thing, whatever. It can be small scale, large scale. But these are some if you're interested in trying to put your photography to work to help out environmental or conservation projects in your area, these are a few tips I have for you. I would reach out to local nonprofits and researchers. That might be the people who own the nature preserve near your house. Start to donate some photos, and they'll start to see, oh wow, these are really great, and maybe then you can offer to do shoots to document projects they're doing. And this might be photos not only of the animal subjects, say they're catching butterflies or whatever they're doing to do a survey. It might be pictures of the people out in the field doing their work. And they will always appreciate high quality, well done photos of them doing their job rather than just kind of crummy phone pics, maybe. I would partner with other photographers, because when you're trying to do, especially if you get a little larger project where they want different kinds of photos, one photographer can't do everything. So getting other people and kind of dividing up, okay, you're going to do this kind of picture, you're going to do this kind of picture, you're going to do some video, that can be a really fun endeavor as well. And if you have people with, like I said, video, some social media, and maybe design experience that you can pull in too, that can really help to get the message out there. And so I would embrace being part of a team in this case to support conservation, because sometimes as photographers, we tend to be a little competitive. I want my photos to be the best. But in this case, you're embracing a team as part of kind of the greater good. And then, if the project takes off, you can network with local businesses and maybe even the municipal government to start to raise exposure for whatever it is that's going on. It can be a really, really fulfilling way to to show off your photography, and also, I will say selfishly, to get yourself access to photo opportunities that you might not otherwise have. So I'm just going to show you a few. images and how I approached taking images for a project that I did back during the pandemic when we couldn't travel, actually. During the pandemic, I took 4 months to work on my Flash ebook, which actually the gift of time was nice in that way. It was the only good thing about the pandemic for me, and I know for a lot of people. But it gave me a chance to finish that ebook. And then after that, when we were able to travel a little bit within country, I went with my friend Paulo, my business partner Paulo, to do a conservation photography project in this area called the Rio Celeste, which is in northwest Costa Rica and is near the Tenorio Volcano National Park. Some of you on this presentation have been to this place with me. And so this is the famous waterfall. The blue water in here is not Photoshop. That's really what it looks like, and it's due to some different sediments of volcanic origin that refract different parts of the spectrum of light and turn these waters celestial blue. So I'm trying to take some pictures as part of this. This was a project focused on tapirs. If you don't know what tapirs are, they're huge mammals. They can weigh up to 300 pounds, that are basically in tropical America and one species in Malaysia. They're loosely related to rhinoceros and horses. But they're one of the most important kind of iconic large mammals in tropical America. They're the main prey of the jaguar, where there are still big intact ecosystems where both of them could live. So I'm trying to take pictures not only of tapirs, but pictures that also show a little bit of the context. This is part of the Rio Celeste where it starts. But I'm trying to, set this off in the area. If you can do some aerial photos for this sort of thing, that can always help. This is a drone photo, and this is a drone photo of part of the national park, but part of a small private reserve run by my friend Donald, a local Costa Rican guy whom I've known for years, who's a conservationist and a tour guide. And he has this small reserve that is trying to protect, that's his business, getting people to come there to do nature walks and to view the tapir and lots of other different things. But it also serves as a really important piece of these buffer zones that they're trying to connect up to protect the tapir in this area because it's kind of become the iconic sign of tourism in this area. It's a really poor area of Costa Rica, and so as tourism growing, it's offering lots of good jobs and lots of opportunity for conservation in the area that wouldn't happen without tourism. And so trying to learn more about the tapir and show it off is really important for the local economy of this area. So again, I'm trying to shoot some wider shots. This is a micro orchid. This orchid is like about a half centimeter long, each blossom. Really, really tiny. I took this one with that Laowa 15 millimeter macro lens, by the way, and I used a flash on the orchid and then a couple flashlights on this big tree in the background. I'm shooting some other birds. Here's a toucan eating wild figs. This is an oripendula taken with a wide angle lens, a collared aracari, a kind of toucan taken with a wide angle lens. This is a kinkajou, a nocturnal mammal, also taken with a wide angle lens and a couple of flashes at night. And so I'm trying to set the scene that there's lots of different biodiversity. And Paulo and I were working together on some of these. But our main goal was to get a camera trap of the tapir. This is the Baird's tapir. And the tree it's by, those big things hanging down, are in the trumpet vine family. You know, the orange trumpet vine that some of you might have in your house around your fence line or whatever that attracts hummingbirds. It's a big tropical, mostly tropical family. And this tree is an endemic tree native to this area. It only occurs in this area. It's critically endangered, and it's the main food source for the Baird's tapir in this area. And so we really wanted to get, tapirs are super shy, so we really wanted to get a camera trap shot of a tapir with this tree in the frame with the fruits on it. And so we worked with Donald and some other friends of mine who run a thing called the Costa Rica Wildlife Foundation, which is one of the best kind of research conservation organizations in Costa Rica, to set up this camera. And we left it out for about 3 weeks, and we tried to light it so it looked like moonlight because the tapirs are more active at night. They're more nocturnal than day active. And so this is the lighting we got, and we were really happy, and the whole project was happy to get this kind of shot that shows the tapir's relationship to this tree. Now, we tried some other things. This is the same tree, but these are the flowers of that tree, which we knew would be pollinated by bats. My friend Paulo, my business partner Paulo, is actually a bat expert. That's what he studied in college, was ecology of tropical bats. And so we set up a wide angle lens overnight with another motion beam sensor and 6 flashes to light up the whole scene. and just hoped that at some point a bat would come by, trip the shutter and of course the flashes. And we left it out. We came back every day and we would set stuff up again and we left it out. And we got two bat pictures, but this is one of them. And so it kind of shows the cycle, right? Because the bat's pollinating this and making it possible for the tapir to have its food. We got a surprise though, because actually a hummingbird, this is a green hermit hummingbird, on two separate occasions, one just after dark and one just before dawn, came to pollinate this flower. And the scientists working on this project were freaking out because this flower does not look like a hummingbird pollinated flower at all. It's clearly a bat pollinated flower. It also has strong smells, which mean nothing to the hummingbirds because they only go towards bright colors, usually red, yellow, and orange. And so they were really, really surprised to see a hummingbird coming to this flower. And I think they're going to start circulating it, and there might be a paper to come out of it actually at some point. So that was cool. When we were there, we also found out that a frog in that lives in Donald's Reserve and only in Donald's Reserve, a reserve called Tapir Valley, and only in 20 acres of swamp on his reserve. That's the only place this newly described species of frog lives. And they were just in the process of getting it officially described and categorized as a new species. And again, it only lives there. That's the only place on Earth. And so they asked us to do some photography of the frog while we were there to help publicize the discovery of this new species and the fact that it's only protected in this area. Um, and so we did that. And I also took some pictures of the researchers out there working. This is the swamp, this grassy, swampy area, marshland in the middle of the forest in Donald's Reserve, where the frog is found. And again, that's the only place. So we did some of them. This is my friend Esteban, who's the head of the Costa Rica Wildlife Foundation. And I took this one with that Laowa 15 millimeter macro lens, by the way, again, with one flash on the frog and just balancing my exposure with Esteban's headlamp. And so I could get this kind of cool shot of Esteban looking at the frog that he was the head of the scientific paper team describing it as a new species. And that turned into a big article in BBC Wildlife magazine that helped to publicize everything that's going on in this area. And so it was really, really satisfying. My friend Donald was super excited, and we shared a delicious cup of Costa Rican coffee after we finished the project. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, as Chevy Chase used to say. And I hope you enjoyed this. Again, this is my website. If you want to see more of my photos, if you want to check out any of the gear I showed, that's all on my website. I should mention, I do one workshop outside of Latin America. I do it in Kansas City, Missouri, and I do it every September, and I'm doing it this year, and I have two spots open for it. So if you want to know more about that, just let me know or go to my website, deepgreenphotography.com, and go to the workshops pages. This workshop, by the way, you might wonder why Kansas City. It's all about photographing macro subjects with flash. And so I'm allowing you to take some really cool pictures of amazing animals from around the world, but I'm also teaching you how to learn flash. It's just a 2-day workshop at a hotel in downtown Kansas City. And the way it happened is I have a friend who I met during my time when I was working at the Missouri Botanical Garden years ago, back when I was in school. And he is a tropical frog and reptile breeder. So that's what he does for a living. His whole basement is converted into a sea of terraria, and he breeds poison frogs and tree frogs and cool lizards for the pet trade. It's all above board. They're all captive bred and everything. So it's a really cool thing. So Patrick brings the animals in, we set them up on stages, and you guys get to photograph them. So if anyone's interested, like I said, I do have a couple of spots open for this September. Again, this is Photo Verde Tours, my tour company. If you're interested in any tour in Latin America, just check us out. And if you want to follow me on social media, which I'm terrible at because I don't keep up with it, but there it is. I'm trying to do more on my YouTube channel. It just takes a lot of time, but hopefully at some point I'll get more consistent at putting some videos on there that are instructional. So I hope that was enjoyable for everybody, and I hope you have some questions.
Great, Greg. Why don't you stop share so we can see you?
Okay.
And then, okay, good. Let me ask everybody, do we have any questions here tonight? I know one thing I wanted to ask you, Greg, basically because your business has grown So since a lot of us originally got involved with you and everything, your information on your website is always up to date, but in the real world for a lot of these trips, how far out should you make sure people make decisions? In other words, how far before you have 2026 out there and you've got 2025 out there now? What percent of that trips are booked and you know,
Yeah, that's a good question, Jay. We try to make reservations usually 2 years out with all the lodges and hotels and everything. I need to fill in a few details for our 25 things and for our 2025 trips, and I hope to have 2026 out. I don't know. Hopefully, like in October.
October this year, 2026, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. In in what's been your history on how quick those particular years book out?
I don't know. It depends, but usually by a year out, usually most trips are sold. Usually.
Okay, then I'm
Mhm.
sure you'll get some cancellations or something and
Sure, that
have a
happens.
few openings and things like that. Okay, okay,
Do you want
okay.
to unmute everybody, Jay?
Pardon?
Do you want to unmute everybody in case they have a question?
Yeah, let me do that.
Are you drinking Costa Rican coffee, Greg, or?
Of course. What do you think? I'm drinking Folgers or something?
No, I thought maybe it was Colombia.
No, a Colombian. I'll tell you what. Paulo, even my business partner Paulo, admitted. Paulo's Costa Rican. Even he admitted Colombian coffee is generally better than Costa Rican. It's really good. But I'm drinking Costa Rican. Yeah, actually from near our town.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I told you this when we first met. Judy and I are drinking Costa Rican K-cups. But anyway, hey gang out there, do we have any questions for Greg? He's here now. He'll be willing to answer. And do you have anything you've been thinking about? If you do, just unmute yourself and jump in there.
I
Thank
have
you
a
so
question.
much, Greg. This was a fantastic presentation, very inspiring at all levels. So thank you. This
Thank
was
you. Thank you for the compliment.
wonderful. I have just a couple of questions. You mentioned about the three regular tours that you have in a year, April, June, and what is the third one?
In Costa Rica, yeah, we have three. April was the one that includes the Quetzal. June is the one that includes more macro, and the one in December is called the Art of Flight, that has lots of toucans and hummingbirds and even bats.
The art of flight. Oh, okay, great, great.
That's in
You
December.
also mentioned about, in your equipment and that you have a phone also, a Samsung
Mhm.
phone to take, good photos. And may I ask you which one it is?
Sure. I mean, obviously iPhones have the great cameras too, but I've been using the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra.
S23 Ultra. Okay.
Yeah, it really, I mean, it takes high quality stills and video, even at 10x zoom. It's really,
Okay. And the night mode is also good.
um, yeah, it's pretty good.
Okay,
Hmm.
great. Thank you so much. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Okay, do we have anybody else out there?
Heard somebody.
I got a question for you. You mentioned how you keep the flashes dry when you've got to set up out in the jungle. Um, how do you keep the camera dry?
Hi, Marty, by the way, and hi, Sheldon. Good to see you both.
I,
You too.
Um, the camera in that, like, I have one of those, I have a rain cover. I have one of those ones that, which I don't like to use it very much because I find it uncomfortable for just regular shooting in the rain, but it's one of those ones that has like the clear plastic and so yeah.
Okay.
Now that was what I did for that shot. When you do a camera trap, if I'm leaving it out for like 3 weeks or a month, then it goes inside. I mean, there are different things you can buy. There are a couple of companies called Camtraptions and Cognisys are two companies that make great stuff for camera trapping. But Paulo and I, when we put our camera trap, we just bought a cheap like off-brand small Pelican case, and we outfitted it with some things to keep it. And so the camera's in a watertight case when we leave it out that long.
Thank you.
You're
Good to
welcome.
see you.
You too.
Anything else out there?
No other questions? Quiet group.
Well, he did an excellent job of the presentation.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Well, hey, if there's no other questions, we'll pretty much get this wound up. But as long as we got a second here, I'm going to tell you about the story about this picture behind me. I think this was my first trip with Greg, and I was photographing this guy right adjacent to the lodge. And this ant was bringing some food back, and he was coming up this log here, and he made a wrong turn because I watched him walk all the way up, got on this guy's very top of his head, and that's where I got this lucky shot. And I kept thinking instantly that tongue is going to come out and that guy's going to eat. It never happened. The ant figured out he was in the wrong spot, turned around, walked back down, and everybody lived happily ever after. But it certainly was one of my unique shots I took away.
Jay, you know what's really cool about this shot, besides it's just a nice photo, but you have two of the coolest creatures from neotropical rainforests or from Costa Rica, Central America, the Amazon, whatever, well, especially Central America, in one shot. And so the lizard is a juvenile emerald basilisk lizard, or the Jesus Christ lizards, the one that run across water, especially the juveniles like this. When they feel threatened, they'll run across a stream. And on top of his head, that ant is a leafcutter ant, the famous leafcutter ants that cut leaves and flowers from plants and take it to their burrow underground. And they don't eat the leaves and the flowers. They actually use those as the medium to grow the fungi, which they eat. So they're farmers. So you have two really cool rainforest creatures in one shot.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Okay, if nobody else has any questions, first thing I'm going to do is stop the recording, which I am doing.